Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another Ontario provincial election video. This is the first one of the campaign. I didn't post one last week, despite normally doing this kind of thing during election campaigns, just because there just wasn't any narrative worth narrating last week about what's going on here. But now there is, so I'll probably keep up for the rest of the remaining couple weeks. And one last thing I'd like to say before I start is I am running a poll. There is going to be it's pinned in the top comment, and it's for the Ontario provincial election. So by all means, go fill it out, send it to your friends and family if you're from Ontario. Get that sample size nice and high. So far, it's looking pretty good, but obviously, the more the sample, the better. I don't think I'll get a 1,000-person sample, but if you guys really want to, and you really try, we can do it. But let us begin here. So, the last few weeks, we've had an Ontario election. Now, leading into this election, there was a lot of speculation over November, December, January of when this was going to happen. And Ford timed it to try to coincide with Trump's tariff threats. And you can kind of see with this data why he did that. So this is where this is where Ford is in January. 42%, leading over about 26% with the OLP. By February 3rd, the Monday just after the tariffs, he's at 46%, and the OLP is at 26.6%. So you kind of see here why Ford timed it just now. The tariffs are really boosting him. And part of that, and I said this before in the federal video, if voters perceive that the current government is doing the right thing vis-a-vis a foreign policy threat, that does boost them. If they think the current government is doing a bad job, that will absolutely, unequivocally hurt a government with a foreign policy threat. But it seems like voters overall in Ontario think Ford is handling the threats from Trump accurately, seriously, and with a good response. And that is boosting him. Now, with the threats tapering away here because Trump pulled back and put a 1-month pause in, it has slipped Ford's numbers a little bit, but he's still in an overwhelming position. And it's really worth noting here, keep in mind that this is projected, but these numbers are slightly different than the actual official numbers because it's based on who I think the electoral pool is going to be. My model isn't exactly a likely voter model, but it is not a likely voter model. I will zoom in momentarily, actually, because I just realized some of this can be hard to see. Here we go. Comment below, by the way, if you ever find when I pull up these charts, if the text is too small, I can always zoom in more if necessary. So the big things here we're really seeing across the board, every region, particularly the East, particularly the South, those are the two ones where Ford's getting the most ground. Places like the GTA are a little smaller, a little less movement. But more or less across the board, you are seeing Ford gain a good amount of ground everywhere. And notably, the NDP for now is falling down, and they're very firmly down to about 18%, give or take. They were down to 16.6 right at the height of the tariff concerns. They rebounded a little bit, though still not in a good position. And the OLP under Crombie is up a little tiny bit. When we flash over to the seat view, we can see here, this is only barely putting them over the line when it comes to seats won. They're only winning 5 extra seats from this. And almost all of these seats are at the expense of the NDP, as you can see here. They're winning the same 4 seats in Eastern Ontario, and they are winning 5 seats in Toronto that the NDP were previously winning in Toronto from 2022. The NDP, on the other hand, is doing really bad. They are losing most of their seats in the South, most of their seats in Hamilton, Niagara, a good chunk of their seats in the North. Really, just across the board, the NDP is doing bad. They're down to about 20 seats in my modeling. Now, part of this, there is some inklings of doubt here. And normally, I wouldn't emphasize this too much, but the particular source of this does cause me questions. And this will be easiest to see if I bring up just the raw polling. So bring this up here, and I zoom in so you guys can see this a bit better. We can kind of see here a lot of these polls have the NDP 17, 15, 16, 18, 19, low numbers. And it's not just Main Street. Some people are saying it's just Main Street. No, Nano 16, Relay 17, Leger 17. Palace and Angus Reid have them at 21, but if I flash back over here, 21 is still down significant ground, and the NDP usually underperforms their polling. Ipsos all the way back in January at 20, like Innovative 19, Liaison 16. So it's not just one firm saying this, that the NDP are doing really bad. But the interesting variance here is with the OLP, because you have firms like Innovative here, 22, Leger, 23, Relay, 25. That's not particularly good numbers for the OLP. In fact, Ipsos down here at 24 as well. You take those numbers, 22, 23, 24, 25, and then you compare that to, again, the last result. It looks pretty close to what they did last time. You could even argue this 26 from Angus Reid is in that same ballpark. If you were to average those together, they're basically unchanged. And the only difference is Ford is up ground because the NDP are down a little bit, and other is down. Okay. Well, the big difference here comes in, and again, you'll notice subtly here, Angus Reid, Relay, Leger, Innovative, Ipsos are all online firms. This is a very common trend in Canadian politics here. The telephone / IVR versus online. IVR firms, though, like Liaison, 31. Main Street, 29. Nanos, 30. Palace, 28. Individually, if it was just one firm, it was just Palace at 28 or just Main Street at 28, you could say, okay, that's just noise. It's one firm. If the OLP is at like 25, 26, and you have margin of error of 2.5, yeah, you could see 28. 28 is within margin of error of roughly 25, give or take. So it could happen. Could just be a fluke. But first off, we have lots of Main Street polls like this. Many Main Street polls. But we also have 3 other firms with very similar data changed by this mode split. Now, does that mean one of these firms is better or worse than the other? I don't know. I suspect, my money is the online are probably marginally more accurate. But I would not outright dismiss, for now, these IVR firms. Now, there is some question with some of them, in the sense that, like, you see Nanos here, 4630. That's a very different result than Main Street's 3928. In fact, this 46 is closer in line with what the online are seeing. Palace is similar in a sense. This 45 is again closer to what the online firms are seeing than what Main Street is seeing. Liaison is more closer to Main Street. So there is even a split in the IVR firms themselves. Liaison and Main Street are more similar. Nanos and Palace are closer to the online firms. So it's not strictly entirely just a mode split. There is also, inside the mode split, there seems to be a split between different firms as well. And you could say, even among online firms, Angus Reid is a lot closer to where the IVR are. So this is not just cut and dry, one is better than the other. There is still noise of sampling. There is still all sorts of other things. I would not outright dismiss any of these firms in and of themselves, and I think you should take them all seriously. The only firm in Canada that I dismiss out of hand is Ecos, because Ecos actually has a track record of being bad. Like, their actual election performance is bad. They're usually very wrong. But that's a whole other kettle of fish. So the question here is, what does this mean? Is the OLP actually in a quite a good position? Are they in a mediocre position? Should we average the two? In practice here, I've averaged the two, which might mean if the OLP is actually in a bad position or in a mediocre position, I might be vastly overestimating the OLP here. That's a very possible result. Though, notably, everyone agrees the NDP is doing pretty bad. Pretty much, there's all agreement on the NDP is doing bad. Now, let us dive in on that subpoint in particular. Oh, sorry, I forgot my main point here. Sorry. What I find interesting, though, about this split is, in particular, I want to highlight campaign research. Now, they have not published anything during this campaign. Campaign research, and notably the CEO, Nick Kuvelis, work for the PC Party of Ontario. You could perhaps consider this to be internal polling that was publicly released. But to as much credit as you should give an internal pollster for a political party commenting publicly about the election that his party and his company are currently running in, Kuvelis is claiming that the firms like Main Street are vastly overestimating the Liberals, and they might be underestimating the NDP. Now, the last poll we have of the NDP from campaign, again, it's low at 18, but perhaps more recent campaign numbers have the NDP higher. I don't know. I don't have the internal data. So there is some question here, because when a pollster working for a campaign is saying, no, this party's actually a lot stronger than the polling is saying, and this other party's weaker, that's obviously, there is some politicking in that. You shouldn't just trust a partisan source per se. But it strikes me as weird for someone to stake their reputation on a claim like that just for partisan purposes. It's not unheard of. It will not be the last or first time if it is true, if that is indeed what has happened. But it is quite a bold decision, and it would be interesting to see how that unfolds here. But let us go back to what I was about to say about what the NDP is doing. So the NDP, as I've touched on many times in the past, the NDP has a huge problem in the east of Canada. Western Canadian NDP, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, to a lesser extent BC, are a more reasonable, rational party. And I say that in the sense that They actually are trying to win elections. They actually kind of understand who their voter base is. They're actually trying to win groups of people. The Eastern NDP seems to just flail around and cater to a hyper-specific, super progressive urbanite voter. And now this is not as big of a problem if you're, say, in New Brunswick or you're in PEI, because the NDP doesn't get seats anyway. So who cares who they're trying to win? It doesn't matter. If you're in if you're Nova Scotia, this is a big deal. The NDP just throw away any hope of ever winning an election by doing this. If you're on Newfoundland, well, the NDP have never won an election in Newfoundland, so I guess it doesn't really matter either way. Whatever floats their leader's current boat. But in Ontario, where the NDP have won an election and have been close, they've been the main opposition in the last 2 elections for the PCs. Running a disjointed, incoherent, and confused campaign isn't smart. And when I say confused, I don't mean the NDP campaign is lost or it's unclear what it's trying to do. I'm saying I mean confused as in it doesn't know who it's trying to win over. Namely, there's 2 big proposals the NDP have so far. One, they want to have a real, very large top-up. Sorry, there's 3 proposals. Sorry. Big ones. A huge, big top-up of Ontario disability benefits. They want to spend about $4 billion recruiting more healthcare workers, particularly 3,500 doctors in the next term. And they want to give people $120 grocery rebate checks monthly for lower and middle income households. They did not specify, to my knowledge, what they mean by middle income, like how high is middle income? Is the average income middle income? Is it the bottom 80 percentile? Is that middle income? Unclear. It sounds like it might be means tested, so it might get clawed back, but I'm not entirely clear on the details as of now. But suffice it to say, this is a very large spending promise. And what makes these campaign promises weak is, well, I think it is an objectively true statement that Canadians are perfectly happy, perfectly willing, and perfectly content to deficit spend. They also don't like when it's flagrant, when it's unclear what the purpose is. In the case here, and why these 3 promises together prove to be, I think, a very bad plan for the NDP. Namely, the NDP is promising to blow out spending, obviously, but none of this spending they're claiming to blow out is going to increase the economy overall. It's not really going to help people. Like, yeah, you could say perhaps people on disability will get benefited from this. But most people aren't on disability. So if that was the only promise, it might be okay. It would not be a major winning promise, though. Putting that as a major platform plank is not a big winning thing. That doesn't necessarily mean a party shouldn't do it if the party thinks that it is the correct thing to do. But it shouldn't be a major platform plank because it's not going to be persuasive to people because most people aren't going to benefit from it. But the other 2, you might think, oh, well, promising to spend a lot of money on healthcare is good, right? Sure. But when the province is already running a deficit, the Ontario PCs are already offering to spend a lot of money on hiring more healthcare workers, and the healthcare problem is national, it doesn't really strike me as a very effective promise to make. You're really, really trying to convince voters that, with a promise like that the healthcare problem is Doug Ford's problem. But specifically with the doctor shortage, that's not really Doug Ford's problem. First off, Wynne did cut the amount of, or the OLP government before Ford, Wynne or McWinty, I'm not sure which premier, did reduce how many medical the residency spots there was to save money, which is hilarious and stupid. But more importantly than that, the entire country has a doctor shortage because, for the most part, medical associations and provinces have not bothered or cared or desired to increase how many doctors they're training. As the population has grown from the immigration we're receiving, and for the most part, whether for good or bad reasons, most migrants who may or may not be healthcare workers are not allowed to work. I'm not here to tell you if that is the right or wrong call, but that is just the reality. So saying you're going to hire 3,500 doctors by bidding up salaries when the entire country has a doctor shortage, and the doctor shortage is only getting more acute, it's not clear to me where you are going to find those doctors. Unless you're just going to claim the next 3,500 doctors that the province hires were hired by your platform, which is dishonest. Because to me, that platform kind of implies you're going to hire 3,500 above what would have been hired anyways. And there doesn't really seem to be an obvious way to do that with how our systems exists, especially with, again, a national doctor problem. And I think a lot of people are starting to see it that way. And they're kind of turning against people in parties just offering like comically large amounts of money to spend on healthcare, unless there's a very clear and specific plan here. For example, in 2021, Tim Houston pitched spending a ton of money, Nova Scotia numbers, on healthcare, but his plan wasn't to just hire workers, per se. Some of that was to hire more doctors. I mean, everyone always says that. But a lot of it was, we're going to build like a hospital, we're going to do this and this and this and this. Like specific, clear things that you can look at and are a permanent thing, not just, we're going to spend a ton of money hiring more workers. Now, that doesn't mean the government doesn't need to hire a ton of money to get more workers, but when everyone realizes that there is a shortage of healthcare workers and no method we currently have of recruiting is able to meet the demand, it doesn't strike people as a very good promise. And then the final one here, this grocery rebate from the NDP, it's also not a great promise. Because, again, for whatever purpose you might think it's a good idea to do this, you're talking about spending a ton of money. I saw a cost estimate this would be in the realm of like $4 to $6 billion a year to effectively just subsidize groceries, because that's what this is. It's a grocery subsidy, so you're subsidizing grocery stores to the tune of $4 to $6 billion a year. And now, mind you, the base of the Ontario NDP 20 years ago wasn't this like poor urbanite progressive that it is today. It was blue collar and industrial workers. And this is not something that appeals to blue collar industrial workers. And that's a huge problem because that's how they're setting up losing London, losing Waterloo Kitchener area. They're losing parts of Hamilton. They're losing Niagara. They're losing all of Windsor. They're losing parts of Northern Ontario. You're losing those areas. The NDP are doing bad there because where they currently have incumbents in seats are blue-collar industrial areas, mining, manufacturing, etc. Those are the two big ones, but there's other ones. Construction, sure. And they're doing nothing to cater to those voters in their major platform promises so far. And they're saying things that doesn't appeal to those voters. Like, your average unionized worker might be open to things like, say, state paying for the dental care or other kind of healthcare stuff like that, or pharmaceutical coverage, etc., or earlier retirement or better pensions. Like, those things might appeal to unionized workers, and the NDP could easily talk about that. But saying we're going to subsidize groceries is just not a thing that speaks to people like this. Because first off, the unionized blue-collar guys don't like the perception that you think they're poor. Usually they're not actually poor either, but that's a whole other topic altogether. But you're essentially saying, you're poor, we need to help you. And that doesn't float well with a lot of these guys, even if they are, some of them are actually poor, but if you say that to them, you'll offend them. If you say that to their face, that is. So that's not a great plan itself. And again, it doesn't offer them anything. And again, are we surprised here that the NDP is offering people a bad offer? Because if we go up here, this is a really important one. Unions and business associations. Endorsements. This is the PC party. The Greater Toronto and Sewer Waterman Contractors. The IBEW. LIUNA. Unifor Locals 1285 and 29X. The Firefighters Association. Road Builders Association. Sheet Metal Workers and Roofers Conference. Like, well, a bunch of major unions are endorsing the PCs here. Or union-like organizations, if you want to say that. And who's left with the OLP, or the NDP, sorry. CUPE, so the bureaucrats, United Steelworkers, and the Ontario Federation of Labour. And apparently no one is endorsing the Liberals or the Greens, according to this Wikipedia page. So I'm not sure how accurate that part is, but I do know that these are relatively accurate. I've seen the other sources for them. That's just a nice condensed summary. So again, you can see here that not only am I saying that these aren't appealing to these workers, they're just not. Like, a lot of these unions are like, the fact that the IBEW is endorsing Doug Ford is quite a large deal. It's a very large union, the electricians union, essentially. So it's a farce. Like, of course the NDP was going to do this bad. They acclaimed Styles. Remember that? They acclaimed her. Like, what is ridiculous. Now, let's pivot here for a second before I go too long on dwelling on the NDP. We'll talk about one quick thing for the PCs, and we'll talk about the OLP here. Because, for the most part, Doug Ford is not doing anything wrong or particularly interesting. Like, he's running a fine campaign. He's in a strong position for various reasons. Mostly his opposition sucks. But there has been one thing that popped up in the last couple days. I think this is mostly relevant. I'm only mentioning this because people will mention in the comments, but what about this thing Doug Ford did? So there was a hot mic moment. I'm not going to play it here because that's too much effort and I don't care. Where he said, paraphrasing, but it's like along the lines of, oh yeah, I was excited when Trump won, but now I'm mad about the tariffs. Something like that. Now, this wasn't a speech. This was a hot mic. So this was him colloquially saying to somebody else. Obviously, he would not have phrased it in such a way on an official meeting. But again, are we surprised this? Like, Doug Ford has said on record in the past that in the U.S. he would be a Republican. That's on record. That's not a new sentiment. And so the idea that this is going to really change anything, I'm extremely skeptical. First off, I don't think most people will have heard of this. But second, even the people who have heard of this, you're not going to see most actual right-wingers in Ontario care that much. There is a lot of antipathy towards Trump at the moment because of the tariff stuff. But I guarantee you, a very, very, very large percentage of right-wingers back in November, October were probably rooting for Trump to win. They might lie to your face and say they weren't, but I bet you they were. So it's just kind of meaningless. I don't think it's going to mean anything. But now we'll move on to the OLP. So Crombie has run a mediocre campaign. As of the time of recording this, she hasn't even filled, doesn't even have candidates running for every seat just yet. She has until Thursday, the 13th, to do that. So, maybe she can. Maybe she'll get there. But for now, she hasn't actually filled all of the seats with candidates, so that's not a great shout or great start here. But more importantly than that, her campaign doesn't really seem clear to me. And what I mean by that is, I don't really think the OLP leadership has any idea what it's doing. They may or may not do better than they did in 2022, because Del Duca was an uncharismatic, uninteresting, boring person. And apparently Stiles is just a bad leader. Wow, the person who was acclaimed without competition is bad at politics? Wow, crazy. Who could have figured? It's almost like leadership races serve a purpose. Absolute clown show. I have no idea how a major political party that had 31 seats was like, yeah, let's just acclaim somebody. Who needs to run a leadership race? Why would we vet and check our candidate to see if they can actually hold an audience and whatever? No. Screw that. This is just a joke. But anyways. The OLP doesn't really seem to have a clear, robust game plan here. Now, we don't have a full platform, at least that I have seen at time of recording. We don't have a full detailed plan here. We have some promises, and I'm not going to go through them all because it's not that important just yet. I will in another video probably. But the main thing here I want to stress about the OLP, and to a lesser extent the NDP, but the NDP's problems are more self-inflicted because they don't like their own base more than anything else. But the OLP's problem, and why I'm barring them realizing and adapting to this over the next 4 years, I'm sure Ford's going to win 2029 as well. I say before he's even won 2025, that's how confident I am, barring the Liberals figuring out what they're doing. Their big issue is no one in Ontario, I'm not even entirely sure if the PCs are aware of this, has any sweet clue of why Doug Ford is about to win 3 majorities in a row, each one larger than the last. I don't think anyone knows. Some might, perhaps. I hope someone in the PC war room realizes why they're doing this, why they're doing so well, but I don't want to necessarily give them credit because they don't seem to govern that way. Ford just kind of meanders about, not really any purpose to his direction. I think a opposition who really understood what's going on could challenge Ford, but they don't. So the big issue here is it feels to me like a lot of left-wingers in Ontario think Ford won by accident in 2018, and that 2022 was just kind of a fluke. That there isn't actually something that they're doing wrong. You'll see polls every now and then. They'll be like, what's Ford's approval rating? 30%. Are you going to vote for Ford? 50% say yes. Or they'll be like, do you want change in Ontario? 60% say yeah, time for change. Who are you going to vote for? 50% are going to vote for the PCs. Silly stuff like that. People are like, oh, well, this is so stupid. Ontarians are retarded. And it's like, no. What? How can... If your thought process is the voters are stupid, you're losing. You're gonna lose. There's no hope you have of winning if your thought process is, haha, people are saying things that I think are contradictory, therefore they're dumb. Get off your high horse. Voters are doing this. People are saying, we want change. We're voting Doug Ford. Not because they think Doug Ford's the change candidate, but because they don't think the NDP or the Liberals or the Greens are change. That's what's happening here. Ford is going to keep winning elections until someone actually offers an alternative to Ford, or Ford does something so stupid that it destroys his party. See the UK Tory party, for example. Why did the Tories keep winning elections from 2010 to 2024? Some minorities, some majorities. Is it because A, they were doing a good job? Or was it B, the opposition sucked, so people didn't want to bother to change the government? They didn't care to change the government. Yeah, it's B. The opposition sucked. The opposition sucks in Ontario. And why do they suck? Well, they suck because they're not actually offering voters change. Because what is Ford's government? This isn't 2019 or 2020. We know what Ford does in power. Ford is, as of the year of our Lord, 2025, when he's about to get his third mandate for 4 more years, he spends a lot of money. Sometimes he cuts certain things occasionally. He likes to give people beer access. More beer. He cuts weird taxes, like the license plate tax. Like, okay, I guess license plate renewal is free now. Okay. He does things that unions like. He pats the unions on the backs with stuff like his trade school plans, which is probably the best thing he's actually done as premier. On an unrelated note, he's basically set up, allegedly, I'm not sure the status of this, but he's promised, he has, I think, started setting up schemes to make it so you can fast track into trade schools if that's what you want to do. But I digress. And he's like just ever so slightly socially conservative. Not in any meaningful fashion, but he'll flirt with it. Whereas the OLP or the NDP will overtly reject it and then trump more social liberalism in response. So, to summarize, Ford is vaguely economically progressive and ever so slightly socially conservative. Ever so slightly. Just very slightly socially conservative. You know what that should remind you of? My favorite chart, courtesy of Abacus Data. This chart! Wow, so Doug Ford is like right here in this block of the 13% surrounded by this 7% block and this 8% block. And there's nobody to his right. So all of these people over here have no one else to vote to, so they either don't vote or they vote Ford. Some of them are voting New Blue or whatever. And like, to be clear, if you're in this block, you probably should vote for somebody. Don't just not vote. That's a bad plan. But a lot of people don't vote. This is why there's Ford Trudeau swing voters. There's not a lot, but they exist. Because Ford's over here. This is where he sits. This is the place he's occupying. He's in this purple square. Very barely. Ever so slightly in this purple square. It's also why he's expressed support for Trump before this tariff nonsense. I say nonsense because it's stupid. Not because, I don't know, being upset about tariffs is stupid. But anyways. Trump is stupid for playing tariffs. On Canada, specifically. Canada, specifically. China or whatever, that's a different question. Canada, though, stupid. And where do the OLP and NDP sit? Well, the OLP might be like somewhere over here. NDP's like over here. They're hard on this progressive cultural side because they're super socially liberal. They do not understand how much being super socially liberal is hurting them. We're talking like 9% of Canadians are in their sphere. Very, very small. And they hammer Ford for being like, he's gonna cut taxes or cut spending or whatever. And it's like, Ford's never cut anything meaningful in his life. What are you talking about? So, like, the whole thing is just, they're attacking Ford bring the diagram back up, as if he's over here. But he's over here. So that's already a problem. They're attacking a man for something he isn't. But then more importantly, while they're saying, oh, you're wrong for being over here, they're occupying like the most niche possible spot on the Canadian left. They're only getting votes, as many as they do, because most of these people over here, on the economic conservative side, aren't voting anymore. Why do you think turnout was 44% last time? It wasn't because left-wingers were staying home. It was because economic conservatives were staying at home because there's no party for them. So I'm saying, like, again, New Blue maybe, but most ridings don't have a New Blue candidate in it. So for most people, that's not really an option or a vehicle. And turnout's probably going to be even lower again because a lot of left-wingers are probably going to stay home out of, like, apathy because it's, like, a total rout period. And again, this is a very similar reason to why Tim Houston won so hard just now and is probably going to win again because the opposition is making the exact same mistake. The Nova Scotia NDP is over here. Houston's... Oh, wait, Houston's over here. What? It's almost like the meta is to be slightly socially conservative. And I think Houston and Ford could be both more socially conservative than they are and still succeed, but I digress. Wow. This chart is great. I get so much mileage out of this chart. But, with that said, though, the summary of this video: the OLP and the NDP don't know what they're doing, and Ford is going to rule Ontario for 1,000 years. With that, I bid you all adieu, and I'll see you next time with something else.